Right, good morning. We will be discussing healthcare, in particular the screenings, techniques and preventative measures that ultra-high net worth clients can take, but also that we can all take to live healthier and therefore hopefully longer lives, but focus on the health. And here to discuss this with me are Kate Woolhouse, CEO of Hooke, Annabelle Name, Vice President of New Markets and Innovations at HCA Healthcare UK, and Dr Paul Glynne, Founding Partner and Medical Director of the Physicians Clinic and a Consultant Physician. Welcome, thank you so much for joining us. So Paul, could you please kick us off by explaining what do we mean when we say health screenings? What are you carrying out for your clients?
Well, the traditional role of health screening is really what I do is medical screening. So that's proactive medical investigation to identify and help prevent disease. So, and I'm sure my panel members, we believe this is really a crucial part of improving health span rather than necessarily just lifespan, which we'll talk about. But from a conventional medical screening perspective, the real value of screening is undertaking investigations at regular intervals, because snapshots are often unhelpful in terms of medical investigation, laboratory data, imaging reports, for example. But longitudinal data and follow-up is really key. So the ability to identify subtle changes in physiology, whether it's a laboratory blood test or a change in an imaging study, is actually far more helpful than an isolated snapshot view. So I think that the value really is establishing relationships with your patients, your clients, and ensuring that you really follow up year after year. And that's the greatest value. And in terms of the specific screening, I'm happy to get into that. But that's just one component about improving health. And it's, to some extent, it is proactive, but often it's sort of reactive because you're getting data at the time. But it's one important component about improving health span.
Just before we move on, when should we all start doing this? Is it too late for all of us sitting here, or is there still value in going and getting this initial screening?
Well, it's never too late. One has to have some sense of perspective about when is the right time. And it's not necessarily the same for everyone. There are differences between different individuals. And what I mean by that is that sometimes knowledge about your health, or too much knowledge, can be a bad thing for some individuals. But in general, it depends on the person, depends on whether you're male or female. But obviously disease and disease incidence, and particularly cancer and cardiovascular disease, increases as you get older. So I think from certainly mid-40s onwards, in the absence of any significant family history, would be where I would roughly, approximately say would be a good time to start. But there are patients who we start earlier because, for example, they've got specific health concerns, or they undertake specific activities that might demand some specific investigation or screening. Or there's a terrible family history. Of early onset cardiovascular disease would be the most common, or a family history of premature onset cancer. So I think to some extent it has to be bespoke. And most people who have got an awful family history will probably proactively seek early screening. But as a ballpark figure, that's where I would start. Thank you.
And Kate, I know at Hooke, you take a more holistic view. It's not just about, the blood test, the medical tests. You're looking at what an entire lifestyle, how that keeps us healthy. Is that right?
Absolutely. We very much believe in the model that Paul is talking about, and we also want to throw into that the importance of nutritional markers, the importance of fitness, health, the psychological well-being, stress resilience, and cognitive function as well. Those are sort of the major concerns that we see people coming to us day to day, is that they want to know that they are physically healthy, And, the first thing we're looking for is the absence of disease, but also then looking to the future to see how are people performing, and what we term the above the neck profile. I think when you talk to people about what are their concerns for their long-term well-being, one of the key things that everybody mentions is how well will they be doing at work? Will they be keeping any worries about dementia at bay? And how much is stress impacting on their well-being overall, which we know it does massively. So it's a huge part of the profile that we build about each client who comes with us. And then when we create an ongoing action plan and sort of program for them, is thinking about those things and how do they manage them in their life. A lot of the people that come to us, they're high-powered execs, or they're maybe leading big family businesses. For them, their stress resilience, their cognitive function is everything, and the prolonging that in the long term is one of their key concerns. And they're almost like elite athletes, and the main difference between an exec and an elite athlete is an elite athlete sort of power programs in recovery time, and executives just keep powering through. So that's part of what we sort of help people manage in the long term.
I'd love to come back to that and also hear more about the above the neck profile. But Annabelle, I know that you have first-hand experience in how important these early screenings are. Would you be happy to tell us a little bit?
Absolutely. Can you hear me properly? Yes. I feel very strongly about this. It's a very personal experience to me, and very lucky at work that we get executive screening. And I have to admit, I didn't go 1 year. I felt fit, well and healthy. Went along for my routine screening and came back with a diagnosis of an aneurysm in my aortic valve. So this was last September, and ended up going through major open heart surgery. So that would never, I was totally asymptomatic, that would never have been picked up had I not gone along to my GP, who actually sat me down, spent a long time with me. There wasn't anything really major there, but she went through my family history, and she just knew that something was off, and I had further tests, and thank goodness I did. So having been on the professional side of healthcare, I was suddenly a patient, which teaches you to have a completely different perspective. So yeah, I'm very, very pro. So go and have your health screens, everyone.
Thank you. And we're so delighted that you're in good health now and that you were able to act quickly, because that's something that these screenings give patients and clients, isn't it? The ability to act quickly, but also to receive perhaps a bespoke treatment that otherwise isn't available.
Just to add to that,
Please.
Stephanie, I think, where I was so lucky is you can have screening in lots of different places, but then you get the results from screening and you need to be onward referred to somebody else who's a specialist or a subspecialist in that area. So I think having that whole network, and I saw a dietitian, I saw a psychologist, I saw a cardiac surgeon, I saw a cardiologist. There was an awful lot of people involved in my care. So to be able to have that continuous network around you, looking after you, and then even when you've recovered, that carries on and you've got a baseline for the next year. So I think that's a really important part of screening too.
Paul, would you be able to talk a little bit more about the benefits of this personalised treatment plan? What is it that executive screening would give someone that you wouldn't get if you were going to the NHS GP, as much as we value them?
Well, I think it's a really interesting question, because health screening, so in the UK, so health screening is really a public health exercise. So it's clearly designed to improve the health of the nation, reduce the incidence of certain diseases at the lowest cost for screening. So, and if you look at the data from that, it probably does, but not always, achieve those goals. But the problem is that when you get down to an individual basis, it can be quite different. So, for example, that health screening approach would not have helped Annabelle. And that's where, if you're able to and you can access bespoke screening, that's why I think, and you think, it's so important. Mm-hmm. So I think the difference between bespoke screening rather than a package screening measures is that it's clearly designed for that specific individual. Now, there are going to be some common themes about screening for cancer and cardiovascular disease, which of course are the two biggest killers. But in terms of when you screen, how you screen, and the techniques that you use and you offer, that very much depends on the individual that's in front of you. You know, I said to you talked about family history, your ethnicity, your lifestyle. All of these things are really important. And there are huge differences, and we discussed this actually recently between male and female health. I mean, that is a hugely important area, which actually, when I think back, about how I was trained at medical school, you were never taught really that there were any major differences, but there are huge differences there as well, which are really important. And the impact of gender and hormones on health and disease is, I think, an area that we're only really just beginning to understand. And the same is true for how our diet, nutrition, and gut health impact on our immune health. I have a specific interest in post-viral and specifically post-COVID and post-COVID vaccine syndromes. And I've seen, we have seen tens of thousands of patients come through with debilitating symptoms. And what we've learned, or what we're learning from the work that we're doing in that field, is how important it is for, and it sounds to some extent somewhat soft, but how important it is that aspects of your lifestyle, like your quality of your sleep, and the quality of your diet, and the quality of your gut microbiome, really influence your immune response to an infection, to a vaccination, and also how your nervous system actually interacts with its environment. And that's really become evident through these sort of post-viral neurological disorders, of which we're still seeing, thousands of cases coming through for every time we get a wave of infection, even if the infection is relatively mild. So I think all these things sort of highlight to me the importance of not only screening through testing, but what you have discussed around that holistic view about improving those key aspects of lifestyle. I mean, you cannot, my view has always been that if you don't sleep properly, and you don't exercise, and you don't have a good diet, I know it sounds obvious, but you would be amazed how many people don't do any of those things. You can do whatever test you like, and you can take whatever drug you want, but they will not have as beneficial effect of those lifestyle interventions as early as possible in your life and all the way through. And that holds true in every single case that I've seen.
You have to get the fundamentals right.
Yeah.
I don't want to jump the gun into the next topics, but we talk a lot about longevity and all of these trendy things, hyperbaric oxygen, red light therapy, ice baths, etc. But you cannot biohack your way out of having a good diet, moving your body, and getting sufficient good recoveries and sleep.
Well, as you've brought it up, why not we discuss longevity now? That's obviously a big buzzword in this field. But I know that in your introduction, Paul, you mentioned a focus on health span rather than lifespan. And Kate, I know that's really important to you too. Why are we wrong to be so excited about biohacking? Why can't I dream of a computer chip that will one day just make me live forever and look like a Victoria's Secret model while I'm doing it?
We just haven't found the little red pill yet. And there's lots of people pumping lots and lots of money into technology and pharmacological innovation, and there's some potentially exciting things happening. But in today and now, and what matters to this group here is people are living longer, but people are spending the last couple of decades of their lives in increasingly poor health. That's the kind of general trajectory for your average human being. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to change that trajectory. We're trying to intervene as early as possible. We're trying to gather the data so that we can personalize all of our interventions so that the majority of people can live as much of their life as possible in good health, free of disease, and enjoy those lives and have them be as productive as possible. And by virtue of that, obviously, you will probably live longer. If you're free of disease, you'll probably push past your 80s into your 90s. past a certain point, there seems to be genetics that intervene, and there's lots of various opinions about whether we can live to 120 or 150, and some people feel very strongly that we can, and some people say absolutely not. And I think only time, and it's a lot of money being pumped into it will tell. But what we do know is that we want to, spend our 70s and 80s in physically good shape. We don't want to be battling cardiovascular disease, metabolic disorders, dementia. You want to be mobile. You want to be independent. There's a baseline of health that we know we can preserve.
So that's, a lot of boxes we have to be ticking to be in the best health we possibly can, mentally, physically, etc. How do you go about providing that for clients and patients? You must have a whole network of specialists who you work with. How do you go about starting the tests? Do you have a set number that you go through initially? Are there basic ones that you do and then you look at history?
We start with history, and I'm sure Paul, you do as well. We start with history. We start with family history, medical history, and we start to build a profile of that person. We identify what their goals and concerns are, because that's really important in what is going to be the motivating factor that actually gets them to make positive changes in their lives, because ultimately that's what we're talking about, is behavioral change. And then the screening process is tailored around those risk factors that we identify, their age, their sex, and anything that's emerged in their family history, and then we go from there. Somebody younger will do a series of tests that are much more focused on fitness, nutrition, psychological well-being, blood testing, but will tend to lean more heavily on imaging for people with significant risk profiles, including age.
Sorry, Paul, I thought you wanted... No, you're all good, all good.
Could I just add to that? I think it's almost going back to the days of having your old-fashioned GP who actually really knows you, understands you. You're not seeing, every time you go, somebody completely different who's quite time poor. And we work with a lot of corporates. A lot of them now have in-house clinics who actually get to know the staff. And it really starts with having that relationship, and then you can get a true story. And then, of course, listening to your own body. I think a lot of people ignore very subtle signs. And I remember, Paul, the other day, you said you're more interested now in what you don't know than what you do know, because that actually is the danger. That's the dangerous bit.
Just a reminder that everyone can submit questions via Slido. That's sli.do.com. We won't be taking individual healthcare concerns, as tempting as that might be, but of course anything more generally we would be happy to discuss. We will also have the option of asking questions the old-fashioned way, so if you'd rather that, then please just sit tight. In terms of this sort of treatment entering the mainstream, is that going to be possible one day? Will we get to a place where each patient is receiving individualized care, do you think?
Well, I think there's an aspiration for the health service to shift to a greater focus on primary prevention. And so that generally is the direction of travel. And there are clearly different degrees to which one can delve into health screening. So I think in the context of this audience, where the opportunity to access the latest in modern screening, I think it's a really exciting developing field. So it's very straightforward to access routine blood work and imaging. But I think the future, and I think that future is not very far away, is in really looking at genetic profiling and in the developments that are occurring in cancer screening are hugely exciting. And they are literally around the corner. So already available, commercially available kits to do what is termed a liquid biopsy, which is effectively a blood test. But the technology that allows you to screen for cancer much earlier than we are currently able to do through standard screening techniques is potentially, I use the word potentially, very, very interesting and exciting. But it is, of course, brings with it a whole host of other problems, which I think are yet to be ironed out. Nevertheless, that sort of technology is really going to change and transform health screening. I think the thing about screening, right, is that whenever you do any test on anybody, I think the important thing is that you know what is the question you're asking by arranging the test. And the person who's having the test, do they actually understand what the test is and what the implications are of that test being positive? Mm-hmm. So, you know, if you're testing somebody's iron level, it's not really a contentious problem. But if you're testing somebody for very, very early signs of a cancer, where you don't even know that that will actually then develop into a clinically important cancer, then that's a whole different discussion. And so I think I sort of just cast a note of caution where I think it's a very exciting field. And it will change radically in the next 5 years. But I'm just slightly cautious because just because you can get any test done that you want doesn't mean it's actually the right thing to do for every individual. So it is an interesting field, and there's sort of ethics around it and the discussions about the implications. And it's not just about the medical implications, and we talked about things like, you know, just implications for things like even life insurance. You know, they can be a huge impact for some individuals, and I've already come across this. So but it's nevertheless a very interesting field.
Do you think you see higher levels of health anxiety in higher net worth or more powerful patients and clients? Is it a stronger preoccupation?
I've seen higher levels of anxiety in pretty much everybody, particularly since the COVID pandemic. Whether I could tell you that the incidence or the levels of anxiety are higher in higher net worth individuals, I don't think that I've observed that. But, you know, anxiety is a huge driver of physical illness, actually. And as I said to you, the sort of the effects of COVID and all the sequelae of infection and the impact on cardiovascular and the nervous system are so mind-blowing, really. And you mentioned it. You know, what I realized, unfortunately, I think is I've realized more and more how much and we just don't know. You know, so of course we only know what we know, but there's a lot more that we just do not. And I think understanding that and accepting that and explaining that, so that you sort of act and you practice in a framework which is honest and open about what is possible and what is not at the moment is also, you know, it's good to include that in a conversation about screening somebody for health. And I'm talking, you know, we've sort of moved on from the step one where you have a test and a heart scan and a brain scan, because that's easy, and that's easy to arrange. And you know, we do that all the time. We've got huge corporate program of health screening at HCA. We've got so that stuff is relatively straightforward, and I think is a given. That's a great idea, and I would absolutely advocate that people do that on an annual basis. But what's really interesting is how it's going to change and what's going to be open to high net worth individuals in terms of early access, and you know, whether they want to be the early adopters of some of this technology is an interesting question.
It's a hugely important question, because we have a lot of people come to us with all sorts of questions about tests and interventions, and they've read about this and they've heard about this, and having very honest, open dialogue with them, explaining to them this is where the science is at, and yes, there's this test, but what is the information you are going to get from it? Is that information going to be valuable to you? What are you going to do with it? Is something that's really fundamental to also building that relationship of trust with somebody, and not just throwing sort of, you know, new exciting buzzwords at them for the sake of it. What we have to do, what we're doing, has to be meaningful for the individual that we're doing it with, not to.
Well, at the risk of bringing in a new exciting buzzword, I would love to know what you think the role of AI will play. How will it make doing what you're doing easier, if it will, or will it mean that we're just flooded with more information?
You need a whole lecture hall for about 4 days to discuss this, I think. But you're probably more up to date.
I'm not sure I'm...
No, I was going to say, don't feel like I'm putting you on the spot.
I'm not sure I'm up to date. I mean, so there's AI in healthcare and there's AI in screening. So AI in healthcare, it's going to transform medicine and science, and already the ability to extract data from the human genome and ask questions related to disease and the differences between different individuals and different populations. I mean, the speed at which that can be undertaken is staggering. And to be quite honest, I mean, undergraduate science students now use this as part of their normal coursework. I mean, when I was a medical student, I've still got my handwritten essays about MRSA when I was at medical school. So it is just staggering, and that's just standard undergraduate teaching. So in terms of healthcare and what we're talking about, I mean, there's how AI will speed up the process for the clinician. So in terms of analyzing data, reporting imaging, the accuracy of that, the reduction in missed events, it's going to really be very helpful, and it already is. There's a few vested interests. I mean, radiologists are probably not going to be rushing to replace themselves with AI radiologists, and it's probably some way off. But that sort of thing, and analytics, great. In terms of health screening and how data is used, I'm sure that's going to be hugely important. And as the data gets more intricate, and as you pull out more and more numbers, and when you sort of do the sort of immunogenetics or cancer genetics, the ability to look at big data in terms of research and predicting outcomes and incidences, that's going to be huge. It's really not my field, but I can see that the opportunity to speed up and accelerate research. I mean, just look at drug development and vaccine development. Any sort of computer-generated model which will be accelerated either by quantum or by AI is going to move that field forward, 1,000-fold, probably more. It's not. So I think the opportunities are really exciting. Whether I think that AI is going to replace me and the conversation, it's an interesting one actually. I would say, I probably would say this, probably not, but it is interesting. There's a human side to medicine. Yes. And then there's a science side to medicine, and the two complement each other very nicely. I think AI is going to be good for that. I mean, you mentioned AI. I mean, there's people you probably may have all have seen this, but there are numerous companies now that will offer AI-related products to enhance the efficiency of healthcare. Be interesting to see whether it actually happens. I mean, doctors are notoriously slow adopters. Anybody who's implemented an electronic health record system in a hospital will know how painful it is, and HCA are going through that pain at the moment. But in terms of AI even recording consultations and being able to generate reports, immediately, it's happening now. I mean, you can do it right now. So I think it's going to have multiple applications. So I'm generally very for it and interested, but in terms of screening, the ability to enhance the predictive value of a test that you're doing, I think that's where the value will be.
Interesting that Paul mentioned, I was just thinking at the same time, that actually the human side of medicine is obviously really important, and specifically to this audience, the anxieties we're seeing more are, yes, you've got the screening, all the topics we've discussed, but a lot of these people are very globally mobile, and one of the biggest anxieties we're seeing is, am I safe to go to such and such a place? Have they got a good medical system? How can we get back if something happens? So, we're dealing a lot with those sorts of issues at the moment.
And Kate, is there anything you're seeing in particular with ultra-high net worth, high net worth clients? You were discussing the importance of keeping their brains ticking over, brains really healthy.
I think there's a couple of things we're seeing with high net worths. Yeah, I think stress management, resilience, and cognitive function are huge themes. And then also thinking about taking care of the family as a whole. We take care of a lot of families, and I think, you know, as Annabelle mentioned, the power of the family physician or family GP. I think that's a huge trend that people are kind of coming back to that old-fashioned relationship of trust, and that relationship that I think AI can't replace quite yet, and making sure that they have somebody that they can really speak to about the wider picture of what's going on in their lives, because we're whole human beings. We're not just our physiology, we're our brains, we're our environments, we're our relationships, and we know that all of these things have a huge interplay in our long-term health outcomes.
Well, we are very fortunate that we're able to speak to you about this. So perhaps before we open up to questions, each of you could let us know one thing that we can all do today to take preventative steps to improve our healthcare, our health. Annabelle, would you like to begin?
I think I've already said mine. Go and get your screening, listen to your body, and as Paul said, it's a constant thing. It's not just a snapshot in that period of time. You just need to continue to do it.
And I think you made the important point that you missed one of your appointments because you felt like you were well, and that's something that all of us know that feeling. So it's really important to be diligent in the same way that we would brush our teeth, you know, twice a day and floss and everything. It's stick to those appointments and make sure you're going.
People are probably better at taking their car to the garage than they are taking their body to the doctors. But it's very important.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephanie.
And Paul?
Well, I would just add to that, if I was in the terms of high net worth and screening, I would definitely sort of as a conventional physician, I would access minimum annually the most detailed, comprehensive blood and imaging analysis that I could, and I would do that every year in, year out, with somebody who knows my case, and is there to effectively look at any potential changes that I could act on immediately. So that's what I would do from a medical perspective.
And Kate?
I think from a practical point of view, the most important thing is working, do the screening, know yourself. All of the advice that we're all trying to give people is as personalized and precision-driven as possible. But also make sure you're working with your body, not against it. And I think at the moment, lots of us don't. So it's about moving your body, getting outside, having a solid diet full of fiber, and getting that recovery time in. Everyone in this room is going to have a very, very long day today. And I think at the end of it, give yourself a break and go to bed early.
And when you talk about moving your body, is there anything in particular, any type of exercise that we should be focusing on?
You will have all read about this already, but we are always telling people to do your slow and steady cardio, which is called your zone 2 training, and to do lots and lots of strength training, especially women. Building muscle is so fundamental to your long-term health. It's, not just your strength and stability and not having a fall as you're older. It helps balance your endocrine system. It will keep you it will keep you on your feet until you're 80 or 90 years old.
Before we do have some questions here, but I'm going to be greedy and ask one more of my own, which is the value of wearable trackers. I think I've seen a couple of attendees here today. Is that something we should all be doing?
It's something that works really well for some people. It gives you valuable insights. You can track your own data. It's a reminder to get on your feet and move if you've been sitting down all day. Some people are really motivated by it. Some people find it gives them anxiety, and that's a legitimate response, in which case stay away.
That's great, thank you. May I please have some technical help here? And while we do that, is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Sorry. This gentleman here.
Just to declare an interest, I'm in healthcare, but first of all, a bit of context and then a question for the panellists. The context, and I think it's important for everybody here to fully understand it, is the gem that is London. With the troubles of the NHS, it's easy to forget how much life science breakthrough goes on in London. We have more teaching hospitals in this capital city than any other capital city in the world. We have a most amazing collection of teaching hospital specialists. But the amazing thing about London is that the level of governance and personalised medicine is different to anywhere else. If you go to one of the big names in the US, like the Cleveland or MD Anderson, you will go into a machine where there will be a presiding, very high quality consultant, but you will be looked after by junior doctors as part of that. In London, the consultant will be at your elbow throughout your treatment. The other piece is the governance. So when you get a group of specialists who work together every day, decade in, decade out, you get groupthink. In London, with your multidisciplinary team governance, you will get, for instance, in Annabelle's case, the cardiac surgeons from Bart's, sitting with the cardiac surgeons from King's, sitting with the cardiac surgeons from Guy's and St Thomas's, and the opinion you will get will not be subject to groupthink. It will be a group of specialists who look at your personal lifestyle, your circumstances, and will give you the best course of medicine. So with all of that in mind, and an advert for London, which I hope everybody will forgive me for, can I ask each of the panellists to give the audience an example of the personalised medicine that you might have given to an individual patient? It's your black book, your integrated network of doctors. Tell us one example each of that.
I'm happy to open that because I would like to think that I do that pretty much every day of my working life. But and he's not a plant, are you? So I set up a clinic, the Physicians Clinic, in 2011, and so we brought together to do precisely what John has just mentioned, which is that. I work at University College Hospital in a teaching hospital, but actually I knew that the best physicians weren't all at University College Hospital, so I apologise for that if anybody hears, but they were actually the people I really wanted to work with, the Champions League of physicians, were doctors from different teaching hospitals all around London. So in fact, I reached out to a large group of these and I said, look, if I could work in an environment with the very best physicians from the very best hospitals, that would be my dream clinic. So that's what we did, and we got 60 of who I've considered to be some of the best physicians covering each specialty in medicine. We don't have surgeons, they're far too difficult to manage, but physicians are they're lovely to work with. And it enabled us to provide really good complex care in the private healthcare sector, because often it's difficult. Private healthcare traditionally has been very fragmented, but we tried to address this by having a multi-specialty physician clinic, hence the name, the Physicians Clinic. And so, for example, I mentioned to you the work that I do now is particular where I have a research interest in the adverse consequences of COVID infection. And this often causes debilitating neurological symptoms, cardiovascular symptoms, neuropsychiatric problems that demands a multi-specialty approach. So the most difficult cases, I'm able to take an overall, if you like, steer and guide care as an internal medicine physician, but I've got access within my environment to long COVID neurologists, long COVID respiratory physicians, cardiologists that we can help manage what are complex problems. And of course, we then all come together on a monthly basis. In fact, our next meeting is actually this evening, where we're able to present very difficult cases and have a panel of some of the best physicians to manage that. So for me, that's a real perk of working in the private sector with the very best people that I want to be with. And interestingly, I can't do that at UCLH in the field that I work in. I find it very difficult to achieve that, but I've been really lucky over the last 10 or so years to be able to do that. So for me, I would say that I'm able to do that pretty much every day of my working life, which is why I enjoy it so much.
Kate?
So for each client that comes to us, our kind of model is borrowed from elite sport. So we create a setup for them that's some bits like something Roger Federer would have. So you have your team of doctors, your coach, your nutritionist, your fitness and specialist, physiotherapist, whatever it is that you need. And they come together around you to make sure that you are optimized from every angle and that you have access to basically this team that work to make you the best that you possibly can be. And I think our real strength, it comes in trying to intervene early whenever we see kind of a potential dysregulation coming through in the system. So, we're seeing early signs of like metabolic disorder. We've got a team of fitness and nutrition experts that can come in and make sure that that person tries to do something about it before we have to intervene, perhaps on a more pharmacological, in a more pharmacological way. And that, I think, is like a real strength of our team, is that the doctors will lean on the non-medical specialists and vice versa.
We have been very lucky to receive many questions on Slido. So before I open up to the audience again, I'm just going to ask one of these. This is from Catherine Grum. Please forgive me if I've mispronounced your name. Are you seeing inquiries from family offices? In the US, family offices are shifting from having a more financial focus to the overall well-being of the family.
Yes, we most definitely are. They're quite difficult to get them to understand you, but actually once you're there and they really trust you. But we run a medical concierge centre actually, and we get many calls from family offices all over the place where something may have happened, or a patient needs to be moved to another country, or has had a ski accident, wants to come to the UK. So we're dealing with family offices more and more.
That's great. Sorry, please, Kate.
I was going to say we do, and it's a growing area, but perhaps not as much as we think that we should. We note from our sort of partners in the healthcare space more widely that, for example, rehab clinics often have relationships with family offices, and it seems that there's always been a strong relationship with people that will help you out in case there's a disaster. But there really does need to be this overall shift towards preventative, proactive care, making sure you're, taking you're a step ahead of anything that might go wrong further down the line.
Yes, rather than waiting until you're at the breaking point of seeking rehab, that we can do stuff before then. This is a long question, so please forgive me, question asker. I'm just going to cut it down slightly, which is, what are the latest developments in dementia cure / advancements in prolonging the, I can't see how it, the question's been cut off, but preventing dementia from progressing as quickly as it is?
Well, I am not a neurologist or a specialist in dementia, so I'll give you a generalist answer to that. So in terms of the science has advanced enormously in terms of understanding the causes of neurodegenerative diseases. And so we are on the cusp as a result of being able to develop targeted therapies to deal with that. Now, I think there are two aspects to this, and prevention is absolutely key. Now, there are unfortunately some neurodegenerative diseases that you cannot prevent because they are genetically determined or inherited. But in terms of the most common diseases, so vascular dementia and Alzheimer's disease, they're definitely a cohort where lifestyle interventions early on are really important. So again, without going round and round in circles, all the things that we talked about the importance of exercise and sleep and diet are crucially important. There's also some evidence, we talked about gender differences. There's definitely a group of women where there is growing evidence from the US, particularly large big data, that menopausal hormone replacement therapy can reduce the incidence of certain types of dementia. So in terms of learning about, and we haven't really talked about hormones, they're a huge area, but that's in particularly in prevention of dementia, that's a really interesting field. In terms of therapeutics, I think it's fair to say it's still pretty limited. The existing drugs on the market, the cholinesterase inhibitors, have very limited benefit. They may slow down the progression in some patients, but they have a lot of side effects. There's been some excitement recently about monoclonal antibodies, and so I think they look exciting. I think the jury's still out because they're not without their problems either. You've probably heard there's been some high-profile issues in terms of adverse effects and causing intracerebral hemorrhage. So, but it is a field that's really accelerating at the moment. But I think probably that's about as much as I should say without straying out of my comfort zone.
Well, thank you so much. Sadly, that's all we have time for. Before I thank our panellists, please allow me to inform you that lunch will be served upstairs, and then please join us at 1:30 for our next panel, which will be discussing life after non-DOMs and the UK status as an international hub for private wealth. But first, please thank Dr Paul Glynne, Annabelle Name and Kate Woolhouse for such a fascinating discussion.